Welcome to the second Humans of New Mobility virtual workshop. My name is Clint Harper. I'm the Advanced Air Mobility Fellow at Urban Movement Labs. And today I'll be your host and moderator for this exciting virtual workshop. Advanced Air Mobility, not flying cars, is on the horizon. Organized by Urban Movement Labs, Humans of New Mobility is an event series that gives voice to the diverse users, providers, and creators of new mobility in California and worldwide. Now, this event is not a typical webinar. We are inviting everyone to join our digital whiteboard and to participate. You'll see the instructions in the chat box, and feel free to start answering all the questions on this digital whiteboard while you listen to our fantastic panelists. Right now, you'll see a demo of how to participate on the Miro digital whiteboard on your screen. Additionally, you can start to ask questions using the Q&A functionality in your Zoom toolbar. And to get moving on this, so again, my name is Clint Harper. I am the City of Los Angeles's Advanced Air Mobility Fellow by way of Urban Movement Labs. And just a little bit about myself to kick this off. I have 23 years of aviation experience, most of that of which comes from the United States Air Force, where I started my career out as an avionics and sensor flight line maintenance technician. After 6 years of doing that, I transitioned over into the airfield management career field, which is very diverse and gave me experience in aircraft dispatch, airport operations, airport planning, airspace management, and education and training. After my military retirement, I decided to pursue my love of cities and fascination with cities, and completed a Master of City and Metropolitan Planning from the University of Utah, as well as a graduate certificate in urban design. After my schooling, I started work as a state airport system planner and economic development lead for the Utah Division of Aeronautics, where I led airport integration efforts across the state. And as advanced air mobility, as the industry started taking off, I saw a correlation with the economic development work that I did with the airports, that was directly transferable over to the advanced air mobility work. And started advocating within the advanced air mobility industry as a community advocate. And that leads me to my work with Los Angeles today, where I'm doing much of the similar work on education, outreach, and advocacy. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here, and also my pleasure to introduce our host, which is Urban Movement Labs. And so a little bit about Urban Movement Labs. So we're a dynamic collaboration across local government. We're involved in the growing ecosystem of startups, innovating companies, and the people who live, work, and visit in Los Angeles. We are committed to a unified vision, which is a Los Angeles where new transportation technologies are tested and proven to bring tangible benefits to Angelinos' lives. Urban Movement Labs works to position Los Angeles as a proactive convener of mobility technology companies and ensure a collaborative approach to incorporating new services into the transportation network for the benefit of all. Urban Movement Labs provides a much needed third space for collaboration, which prioritizes a community-first approach for local agencies, communities, and companies to co-create and co-implement mobility solutions. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce this fantastic panel. So we have Behnaz Rezavi. She is the City Activation Manager for Supernal Urban Air Mobility. Matthew Friedman is the Chief of the Office of Aviation Planning with CalTrans Aeronautics. Priscilla Roldan is the Strategic Partnership Associate with San Diego Association of Governments. Gabriela Safranik is the Associate Transportation Planner with CalTrans. And Barry Chapman, who is Vice President of Aerospace and Defense, Federal and Marine Industries at Seaman. And so one of the things before I turn this over to our panelists to give them a more in-depth introductions of themselves is, when we were putting this program together, we really wanted to emphasize, I guess, the fact that bringing advanced air mobility, holistically into communities is going to require a new diversity of thought. So, we knew that transportation planners, particularly the transit planners and the more surface-based planners, they've been dealing with integration, equity, and a lot of the other issues that advanced air mobility is contending with for decades now. And so these traditional planners, bring new levels of insights. And so as we get into the discussion here, I want to invite them to not hold back on what brought them into the aviation space, how their insights in their previous positions is informing, the direction that we should take aviation into the future, and really, seeing this as an integrated mode, that complements the transportation system. And so, with that, Benaz, do you want to provide a deeper introduction?
Sure, definitely. Hello, everyone. I'm Benaz, and I'm really happy to be part of this dynamic discussion and panel today. Thank you for tuning in. I work for Supernal as a city manager, city activation manager. And if you haven't heard of Supernal, it is a part of the Hyundai Motor Group, and we're manufacturing an eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing, in the advanced air mobility or urban air mobility space. You'll hear me saying AAM or UAM as we talk. What we're doing at Supernal is we're looking at the industry in a holistic manner, where we're not just focusing on the development of the aircraft, but we're partnering with external stakeholders, both on the public side as private side, in order to launch AAM in regions successfully and being proactive in our dialogue with them. A little bit of background on myself and how I fit in to the panel today. I'm an urban planner with a focus on transportation throughout my career. I got very interested in transportation and getting people out of their personal vehicles when I led the first complete street study for the US Navy. And I've heard it's being implemented, so that's very exciting. What we did is we worked with Navy-based stakeholders to make sure they have everything they need in order to run their missions. And we educated them on how they can use the pavement for other modes of transportation when they're moving around on base. So we made their bus system more efficient, introduced pavement markings for bicycles, and improved their pedestrian network as well. And ever since that project, I've tried to incorporate getting people to use alternate modes of transportation when working on projects. I've worked with private developers, bringing new developments and construction to sites and looking at the transportation impact they bring. Doing their traffic impact studies. I worked on the public side, working with community members to ensure that their streets are safe for pedestrians, vehicles, and bicycles, incorporating public complete streets in their grids, as well as worked with transit agencies to increase efficiency and add more routes where needed. And all of this has a theme. We're trying to make sure the transportation network is working safely and effectively for people. And, we talk about living in a global village, and it truly is affecting how we travel, how often we travel, how far we are trying to travel, and frequency, further distances, expectations of how fast we travel are changing the way we think about mobility. At Supernal, we're engaging the public sector agencies as well as local partners in a region to understand what their transportation network gaps are, where we can augment that transportation network and add a tool in their toolkit of alternate mode of transportation to reduce car dependency. But there is not just one tool of advanced air mobility. Walking, biking, traveling by public transit, and of course, vehicle movement all have to work together. So we work with the public, we want to engage them, and you'll see this background that Clint has, and Jorge is going to pull up for us as well. This is a tool we've created to work with the public stakeholders, make them understand a technology that they're not familiar with, have not heard of before, or is not common in their neighborhood, but they will be impacted by it. It's not the people who are using advanced air mobility as a transportation means, but also the neighborhood that is going to be impacted by this type of mobility hub or a vertiport, which is where an eVTOL lands and takes off. So in this scene, for example, you'll see that it's on top of a transit station. This is a hypothetical landing pad for an eVTOL, and there are bus corridors nearby, and other views may show this better, but there is micromobility use. There are bike lanes in this main street, and people are obviously free to move by their vehicles. Jorge, if you want to show the different angles that we're showing this. So this really engages the public, makes them have a tangible visual of what the future could look like in a neighborhood that they have been walking around. And we can get feedback from them, be proactive in hearing out what their concerns are before implementing this disruptive mode of transportation. What we're trying to do is use this disruptive mode of transportation not to create chaos, but add connectivity opportunities to communities. I hope that was a good introduction, and looking forward to answering some questions.
That's awesome, Behnaz. I really appreciate that. And Matt and Gabby, I understand that you're going to be tag teaming your introduction, so I'll turn it over to you both.
All right, thanks so much, Clint. This is Matt Friedman. I'm the office chief, or the chief, pardon me, of the Office of Aviation Planning at CalTrans. And first, a little background on myself is I've been at CalTrans for 17 years. Prior to that, I got my degree in planning from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So there's a big shout out to any Tar Heels out there. And I began my career in Monterey County doing all sorts of stuff, regional planning and so forth. Then I went to seminary. So I spent 5 years of seminary and about 10, 15 years serving as a congregational rabbi. So I imagine I'm the only graduate of Hebrew Union College on this call. In my 17 years at CalTrans, I mentioned originally was hoping to be in rail or aviation. I am doing the roads most of the time, but 2 years ago, I was given the opportunity to come into this office. And all I can say is, to quote a famous air traveler, we will engage in going to boldly go where no one has gone before. And never have we experienced in recent years the opportunity to explore and see not just a new mode of transportation, but a new way to solve some of the challenges that are facing us in terms of transportation and society. So this is a great time to be in aviation, a great time to be in planning. At this time, I'd like to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Gabby Safranek, who'll introduce herself and begin our presentation.
Yeah, Jorge, could you throw our presentation up? Awesome, thanks. So I am Gabby Safranek. I am an associate aviation planner here at CalTrans. I have been in the division a little over a year, and previously to that, I was managing public projects for Union Pacific Railroad. I coordinated with a diverse amount of stakeholders within Union Pacific, as well as at all levels of government on a variety of different rail projects. And it has been a bit of a mode shift, but I am super excited to be in this space during such an exciting time for both aviation and also transportation planning. I also moonlight as a graduate student in San Jose State University's Transportation Management Master's Program, as well as UC Davis's Land Use and Environmental Planning Graduate Certificate Program. And with that, Jorge, could you switch us to the next slide? Perfect. All right, so first we're just going to go and start off with an overview of CalTrans Division of Aeronautics and how our different offices have and potentially will be involved in advanced air mobility, or AAM as you'll hear it, in the future. So first, our Office of Airports, our pilots, they permit and inspect all the airports and heliports in California, and will likely include vertiports or AAM takeoff and landing facilities in the future. Our Office of Technical Services provide engineering support to California airports and heliports, and eventually vertiports. We also have our own pool of drone pilots here at CalTrans that use drones for a variety of tasks, including bridge inspections. So the Office of Technical Services manages a training and certification programs for all of our drone pilots. And then lastly is the Office of Planning, where Matt and I are from. We are responsible for the California State Aviation System Plan. So our latest system plan update, or it was adopted around a little bit before this time last year. We are just about to begin prepping for our new update, and it will include more in-depth information about advanced air mobility and what advanced air mobility means to the California State Aviation System. We are also responsible for providing guidance for airport area land use planning. So we publish and update the California Airport Land Use Planning Handbook, and we are currently working with UC Berkeley to conduct a gap analysis to facilitate the update of our 2011 handbook. And we are looking to include more information and guidance related to advanced air mobility in this document as well. Next slide, please. So looking more specifically at aviation planning here in California, at the state level, we don't have any land use authority. All airport area land use planning is a local function that is conducted by airport land use commissions throughout the state. For those not from California or not familiar with airport land use commissions, the California Public Utilities Code requires the formation of airport land use commissions. Typically, each county has one airport land use commission, and this function is often taken on by regional planning organizations. And airport land use commissions are charged with preparing an airport land use compatibility plan for the airports in their jurisdiction. So these plans are the overarching planning document for the airport influence area and take precedence over the city or county's general plan. Airport land use compatibility plans are prepared and updated with the guidance that we provide in our airport land use planning handbook. So eventually, as advanced air mobility guidance matures, it's envisioned that airport land use commissions in California will incorporate advanced air mobility facilities and compatibility policies into airport land use compatibility plans. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt for him to discuss more on other state level advanced air mobility considerations.
Thank you, Gabby. If we were to leave today with one thought from the state level, is the idea that technology, regardless of the technology, is always ahead of policy and ethics. And as we view these new technologies, let us never forget the concept of policy and ethics and use that as a guidepost as we move forward. As Gabby mentioned, our last handbook was adopted in 2011, which meant the precursor research was even earlier than that. So we're hoping to move beyond just 2022, but into the future in our new handbook and anticipate some of the issues. What are some of the topics that come up for us? Well, for one thing, we want to strengthen the planning partnerships at all levels of government. That while the local governments, local airport land use commissions will write their own plans, and that local entities will write their own general plans and will review projects, we want to assist in giving guidance and support and continuity and also cooperation. And there is no doubt that vertiports will be a part of that mix. And what we're seeing is a great convergence of issues. If we look back in the past, airports were often far away from the center city. But over the last 50, 60 years, the cities have grown, and certainly in California, we have seen where cities have come to encompass airports. And so the issues and the policies that go with that have melded. And with the vertiport, it's even more important, where the vertiports themselves will be located either in commercial districts or perhaps even in residential neighborhoods, which brings up one of the major issues that we discuss frequently, and that's the concept of equity. And there are two main elements of equity. One is access. Who will have the ability to reach a vertiport and ride one of these beautiful aircraft? Will they be affordable, and will they be available? Certainly, like with any other part of the transportation infrastructure, accessibility is a very important element. And that also includes accessibility to other modes of transportation, because you get off the aircraft, you have to get to your final destination, whether you walk there, bike there, ride a bike, or take a car or transit service. They all must be integrated. And then there's the issue of exposure. Will neighbors want to have a vertiport essentially in their backyard? And the question is, we need to be careful. How do we be careful? We know very well in California, there's an issue of what's often called infrastructure trauma. And no better description and illustration of that was the construction of the interstate highway system starting in the 50s. We don't want to see that happen with AAM. We want to see this done in an equitable and just way. And with that, I'm going to close with a little bit of what some of our engagement plans are, and I'm going to ask for the next slide. And among the various engagement activities we have is we work with San Jose State University, and they are conducting a GIS modeling tool for vertiport placement. One of the real highlights of that particular program is that the tools that are being developed will be accessible to community nonprofit groups. It's simple, basic GIS, and then data sources that are available through city sites as well as metropolitan planning organizations, census, and so forth. So we're really looking forward to that being launched. Also, we're working, as Gabby mentioned, with the University of California to do a gap analysis. So when we develop our new ALUC guidance through the handbook, it'll reflect not just the current needs, but those that are coming about. And then we go to conferences. CalTrans hosted a conference with UC Berkeley in the future of aviation, focusing directly on these very issues. And the links to those recordings are on your screen and will be in the slide deck. And also a link to tech transfer at UC Berkeley. And we were very pleased to see we had 200 or so participants there. 2 weeks ago, another opportunity occurred to participate in the Decoding the Vertiport and explaining a little bit about what the issues were on the ground with regard to the placement of vertiports and just how this AAM phenomenon is going to be functioning. And we were very pleased to partner with faculty and from students from San Jose State University. And I'd like to throw in a quick sidebar as Gabby called it a moonlighting job. I'm a student in the certificate program in transportation security and safety. And beyond that, we've also participated in other working groups, roundtables, and a lot of information sharing. With that, I'm going to close unless Gabby has a final comment, and we'll pass the mic.
No final comments? All right. Really appreciate that, Matt and Gabby. That's awesome. I love the title slide, to boldly go, and I know for a lot of the participants on our panel, I know there's some trepidation, some hesitation, on participating in something like this, being relatively new to the aviation space. And I think, your presence here, in now, establishing yourselves as leaders within this industry, is really inspiring. And so I'm hoping that, for some of the folks in our audience that, that are looking at, or have a desire to make an impact and change, for example, the aviation industry for the better, I think you all serve as a great model for that. And so I appreciate that. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Priscilla Roldan.
Thank you, Clint. I'm just going to wait for the slides to go up before I start. If someone from the Urban Movement Labs can assist me with that, that'd be great. So hi, everyone. My name is Priscilla Roldan. I'm a regional planner at the San Diego Association of Governments in the Strategic Partnerships Division. And for those of you who don't know who SANDAG is a metropolitan planning organization and regional planning agency for the San Diego region. We're federally mandated to develop the long-range transportation plan, which is the blueprint for how San Diego will move, grow, and how people will move in the region. And so next slide, please. And so our latest and greatest long-range transportation plan was adopted in December of 2021, and it's known as the 2021 Regional Plan, which presents 5 key strategies that will create a comprehensive transportation system for the San Diego region. Next slide, please. And so these 5 key strategies are known as the 5 big moves, which comprise of complete corridors, flexible fleets, mobility hubs, transit leap, and the next generation operating system. Each individually presents some solutions to get people from point A to point B. Flexible fleets, for example, refers to on-demand mobility services like Uber and Lyft. Transit leap refers to high, quick, fast-paced transit. Mobility hubs are areas where different transportation modes will congregate to provide mobility services, and complete corridors refers to different freeways that will function on demand depending on the transportation demand in the area. And so we're beginning to work in advanced air mobility in this space to prepare our local jurisdictions in the region for these new technologies and understand how we need to integrate these into our transportation system. And so we recognize that we need to strategize and we need to figure out how we need to integrate these mobility modes today. And so next slide. And so we partnered with the San Diego Regional Airport Authority to practically plan for advanced air mobility. And in the next few years, we hope to deliver 4 key things that will include community engagement, collaboration, and industry to really figure out how we can integrate advanced air mobility into our transportation system. And we're excited to see what's going on and what's going to happen. And so it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And to keep things going, let's pass it on over to Barry.
All right, thanks. I'll share my screen here. I think you should be able to see. Oops.
We're seeing the presentation view, Barry.
There we go. How about now? Perfect.
Yep, good to
All
go.
right, thanks. Hi, everybody. Well, I appreciate you having me on the panel. My name is Barry Chapman. I manage our aerospace and defense and our federal business for Siemens Digital Industry Software. I've been with the company for 25 years, focused on the aerospace and defense industry. I find this one of the more exciting topics that we could speak about. What Siemens Digital Industry Software does is provide the engineering, the manufacturing, and the digital technologies that build the aircraft and model it and simulate it in the environments that we talked about. So I think just to start out, Ignacy, I love that image that you have of what a future regional kind of port would look like. And I think if you take a step back, just go back 19 years. If you went back 119 years and this picture came out, but if you go back, let's say 121 years, what people would think about this image would be insane. People couldn't believe that people could be flying. I think the image that you started out showing is the same thing. Very quickly, people are going to understand the power and the impact of AMM in our communities. And if you think about that image, just imagine today, if we model that same thing the Wright brothers produced, and we were able to digitally model that, how quickly we produce aircraft. And that's in essence what we're doing, right? We're modeling it, we're flying aircraft digitally before you build it. So all the conversations the previous panelists have spoke about, we're going to try to accomplish all those things, simulate all those models. We're going to do it digitally. So I think it's a very interesting perspective that we'll provide, and how can we work with communities, the manufacturers, and regional and governments to provide this in a more digital format to simulate what we're doing. So if you think about it, these images that you're seeing, I think an image is worth 1,000 words. In essence, what we're able to do now in today's and the tools that are available is what you're seeing here is the ability to simulate a model of a AMM that's going into an area, but also be able to simulate the environment around it, which you're seeing on the right, to be able to understand the environment you are, the people, the buildings. And we do that all digitally, because the way to certify, you're going to have to do it digitally. So you'll see these tools and technologies allow manufacturers and governments to simulate these environments. And just to give you an idea, what we do is we're both simulating the environment of how to build an aircraft, but we're also simulating how to manufacture it. And we're also digitally simulating how it interacts with the people, the consumers, and the maintenance at facilities. And so that whole environment has to be done digitally. So the way that we're going to produce, and the market's going to produce aircraft faster for AMM, is that we're going to do much of what you need to produce to be certified. We're going to do that all digitally, right? And a lot of it digitally. And then just to give you an idea, some of the things you have to think about that I think some of the previous panelists spoke about, right? From your kind of traditional air travel, we have to figure out how to digitally verify and validate and get certifications. We have to digitally simulate the thermal and energy. Noise is such a big issue, right? We have to digitally simulate the noise, and how can we reduce the noise impact throughout landing and takeoff, and then how do we get acceptance from the community, right? And those kind of things with noise. And then also, what's the passenger? What's the end-to-end passenger experience between advanced air mobility and the last mile or wherever they still travel? And I think a lot of the panelists on the panel are looking at also, like, it's one thing to have AMM deliver a passenger, but it's another thing to get them the next mile or two to their end state. And just once again, we give you an idea of some of the things that need to be done and some of the things that you have to simulate. Simulate the airflow, you simulate the movement of the parts and the maintenance. You actually simulate the ability for an aircraft to land and the effects it has on people. And you simulate in the right-hand corner, you can actually simulate the comfort of a passenger in the airport and those kind of things. So I bring these up because I think it gives you a little bit of a view of all the capabilities digitally that need to be taken in consideration while we're building aircraft today. And whether it's a Whisk or a Joby or an Archer Aviation, all these companies are doing these things digitally. So just to close, I think what we're trying to do is provide that capabilities for the industry. One of the topics I think is interesting, though, is we shouldn't just look at the advanced air mobility companies, the companies like Whisk or Joby or Archer, like I mentioned. Many in the industry are doing it today, and we could take best practices and lessons learned from the commercial aircraft companies, a lot from defense, and learn from what the defense industry is doing to not only simulate, but make advanced air mobility much more safer, much more readily available to society. So I appreciate it. I look forward to being on the rest of the panel. Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, I appreciate that background. So, kind of set the context for moving into our next section, which is going to be questions for our panelists. I want to just kind of summarize, who we have here on the panel here. So we have representation, from the state, from the regional authorities with SANDAG. I can provide a perspective from the city, and then we have a industry perspective that Benaz brings from Supernal, and then we also have a consultant advisor perspective that Barry brings to the table on how how we can leverage other existing technology to help plan for all this. And so with that context, I want to kind of level some ground here. So initially, Urban Movement Labs, the community engagement consisted of education. And a big part of that education is in the title of this program, where advanced air mobility is not flying cars. And that's something that I think that the media has propagated out there that's made this whole industry confusing on what kind of opportunities might exist, and how this new evolution might make the aviation industry cleaner, more accessible, and quieter. And so with that, we want to bring this back to aviation, for a minute. So advanced air mobility is aviation. Within aviation, we have traditional and legacy issues that we're always contending with, primarily being around noise, emissions, and accessibility. On the accessibility front, if you look at folks that live around a small general aviation airport, they are typically exposed to more than negative externalities associated with aviation, but have the least amount of opportunity to use the opportunities that are happening at that airport. And so as we look to electric, hybrid, and more automated solutions within aviation, there's opportunities to solve for all three of those issues. Electric motors are certainly quieter. They don't produce any direct emissions. We still have to worry about where the energy is coming from on the grid, but we can. I think that's much easier to manage there. And then also the accessibility point. So I know a lot of the OEMs are looking to make this service more affordable for a wider range of people, to make it a viable mode choice for certain types of use cases. And so with that, I want to get into our questions with that background. As aircraft OEMs are navigating through the aircraft certification process with the FAA, we are expected to see the first aircraft certification happen sometime in late 2024, perhaps early 2025, with an early first commercial launch soon afterwards, probably in 2025. So I'd like to address this to all the panelists. What do you see? What will an initial deployment look like in terms of use cases, scale, impacts, just from your perspective, is being relatively new to this industry, where are we going to see the biggest bang for our buck? How are you seeing that within your region or your jurisdiction? And I'll turn that over to everybody, and we'll go down through the same level of how we did the intro. So Benaz, I'll let you start.
Sure, thank you for that question. And launch dates are dependent on who you ask. We have industry players who are saying as early as 2024, 2025. At Supernal, we're looking at 2028 and 2030, so end of this decade. And at the time of launch, you will see AAM aircrafts in our skies, depending on where you are. This is not going to be the case in every major city in the world, rather in a select few. And even in those select few cities, it's not going to be a consecutive service or running regularly. We're looking at targeted pilot programs that are going to serve targeted origins and destinations. For example, there are the to and from airport routes, locations that use existing permitted airspace routes. And these are going to be scheduled, perhaps even scheduled on demand based on traveler demand for certain times of day. So not at large scale in the very beginning, and not scattered in multiple use cases, again, at launch. And that's the perspective we have at Supernal.
Awesome. What about at the state?
Well, let's take a look at how automobile features come to market. Like the backup cameras initially appeared on the high-end cars, and now they're pretty much standard everywhere. So similarly with the aircraft that's being developed, you'll see it being used for high value uses such as delivering high priority cargo, medical supplies, blood, and so forth. And that's already happening. In Ghana, they're using drones, for example, to deliver blood supplies to remote areas. And as the number of aircraft increase, as the providers begin to identify the markets, and then the policy folks at our end begin to place these facilities, it'll begin to form a more diverse and more broad application. Gabby, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I would like to add that there has been a focus on urban air mobility a lot of the time. And I think taking a step back and looking at regional air mobility and the use of AAM aircraft at existing airports is going to be what I think is going to be a catalyst for advanced air mobility. I believe the McKinsey & Company had a report that said 2/3 of the 25 largest advanced air mobility companies stated that airports are their initial test markets, as well as the state of Ohio has an advanced air mobility framework document that identifies regional air mobility working out of regional and local airports as an early catalyst to advanced air mobility. Washington State also has an electric aviation feasibility study that focuses on regional air mobility as well. So I think focusing at airports and the impacts that are going to happen to airports with advanced air mobility is kind of going to be the early and first adopters.
Awesome. And I'm really appreciate you bringing in, the different use cases on there too. So you talked about the work that Zipline's doing in Africa with the medical deliveries, the blood deliveries and stuff. So, advanced air mobility, encompasses a wide range of use cases and types of aircraft as well. And so, with the small drones, what they're able to do to add to streamline some of the efficiencies out of the system. And then also with the regional air mobility, which will, I know there are some eVTOL operators that are targeting the regional air mobility market, but with that, you also have traditional aircraft that are being retrofitted with electric motors and hybrid motors to provide more regional access on that front. So all of those are exciting opportunities for airports and the existing infrastructure that's out there. And so what do you think about from the regional perspective at Sandag, Priscilla?
I think I have the same answer so far. So ditto what everybody has said so far. In terms of scale operations, they're most likely to see pilots as initial use cases, and there will be those in itself will be iterated and improved to inform some of the large scale deployments that we'll see in the region, and until they're good enough for regulations like the FAA to approve and actually be largely adopted by the community as a whole. And so it's going to be like a slow incremental change. We will not see these things overnight, and they certainly will not change our user perspective. And like Matt already said, we've seen this already. These are use cases already happening around us. They're being used for fire mitigation. They're being used. CalTrans is using them for bridge inspections. And so they're already happening. It's already here. In terms of like the big Jetsons kind of imagery, I mean, it's going to be a while, and industry is setting the timeline for that. And so we'll see when everything kind of comes into play.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I think one of the myths that's out there is that we're going to go from zero to fully autonomous Blade Runner, Star Wars type of scenarios. And I think everybody that's been in this industry for any amount of time realizes that we're moving methodologically. And I think that's important to recognize, and something that we can thank the FAA for, as well as aviation right now is one of the safest modes of travel, not the safest mode of travel within the United States through commercial aviation. And so the aviation industry isn't going to sacrifice that level of safety to rush something along. And so I think it's important to maintain that perspective that we're going to see this slow and iterative approach to implementation. And so coming from the consultant advisor space, Barry, with knowing that we're going to be leaning into this carefully, what does that look like for the services that folks like Siemens can provide to cities and other jurisdictions and to aid in their planning efforts?
Well, I think one of the things is getting feedback, right? So I think, Matt and Clint, you both mentioned like international opportunities that are going on today, like Zipline's a great example, like they're doing it. I think also is taking a look at cargo. So there's companies like Freedom Lift Innovators who are doing cargo delivery. And I know we're urban movement, but I think there's a rural movement that's going to be using and like farms and whatnot. And my point is that the data that comes off of those aircraft is critical to have a closed loop feedback to always constantly improving the aircraft, right? And I think when we get to the certification timeframe, the ability to incorporate changes that are needed at a federal, at a local level are going to be critical for all these aircraft to get to market faster.
Yeah, and yeah, really glad that you brought in the cargo perspective as well on that too, and the rural perspective, because I think that's so important. We saw from the movie Cars, how the interstate highway system, disconnected some communities from, where they originally had strong connectivity. And I think that's based on real life. And so if we look at some of those communities that were once connected but no longer are, something that comes close to my heart within the rural communities are it's Choctaw Nation and the work that they're doing on testing various advanced air mobility technologies and figuring out how they can leverage it to solve for some of the transportation gaps that they experience within their jurisdictional boundaries. And so that's great. So let's move on to more of what we brought you here for, is to get your perspectives as transportation planners into this aviation space. And so Priscilla and Banaz, over the past few decades, transportation planning has evolved to become more collaborative and multimodal. And so I'm wondering, what lessons learned can non-aviation transportation planners bring to the aviation space to avoid repeating those same mistakes that lead to an inequitable transportation system?
I'm going to touch on 3 areas that we can bring to the table. And I think this is a great question. This is an area where our aviation experts can really rely on the urban planners as they bring advanced air mobility to city travel. The first one is micromobility. We can learn a lot of lessons from micromobility when they first showed up in cities. The headlines were they showed up overnight and there was little preparation for it. The sidewalks were cluttered. There was improper parking of bikes in the public right of way. And it was really a challenge between the experimentation and the regulation. Regulation was not caught up to the experimentation. And we have to be proactive in the space of advanced air mobility. These eVTOLs are larger aircrafts. They are not similar in size or space needed or infrastructure needed as scooters and bicycles. They will take up more footprint, and we need to be proactive as industry players in engaging with our local, state, municipalities, the regional planners to ensure that regulations are up to date or are open to having this type of mobility in their transportation system, and really take it as an opportunity to enhance the system. So that is being proactive on the regulations. The second piece I want to touch upon is AAM's contribution to placemaking. Like I showed in our early visualization, advanced air mobility, these eVTOLs need vertiports, and we are advocating having mobility hubs. So bringing connectivity between various modes of ground transportation to these eVTOL landing pads or vertiports. So it is an opportunity to have these vertiports be an element of placemaking for communities that were invested in the past but were disregarded. They have a lack of placemaking element, or they have a single point of entry, reducing flow of people in and out of that community because they have to rely on just their personal vehicle. So if we can workshop with those communities to see how this can add value, this can increase their ability to expand their workforce, as well as provide them access to areas where they could not drive to or get to because there is lack of other transportation modes, we can incorporate that and use that as an asset. And the last piece I want to touch on is the really level of expectations, the need for compatibility and inclusivity that comes with intracity mobility. Aviation needs to understand what the passengers need when they're traveling in a city. There's a higher expectation. There is more regulations that come with transportation in cities that aviation industry can learn from, and we are working with diverse stakeholders and potential passengers to see how we can incorporate their needs when we're developing our vehicles and designing it. Priscilla, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, In 2015, just like you said, we had on-demand mobility services that surfaced our streets, and there weren't enough policies in place to actually regulate these. And so I think today we're experiencing the unintended effects from the quick adoption of these technologies. And in San Diego specifically, we have areas, for example, that have little to no access to on-demand mobility options because of their affordability or because the areas are not seen as profitable. And so, of course, that creates equity concerns. And on the other hand, there are some reports released. The California Air Resources Board highlighted that almost 40% of the total vehicle miles traveled in California are attributed to deadheading from transportation network companies. So like TNCs like Uber and Lyft are taking trips basically without passengers, and that's creating 40% of the vehicle miles traveled in California. And so regional planners experience this firsthand. We're seeing these unintended effects, and I think we have the opportunity to now proactively innovate or plan for the innovative transportation services like AAM. And then we can also kind of educate the aviation planners about this. And so we have this commonality where public sector, we need to protect public interest. And so hopefully we can work together in the future to see how we can make AAM different than previous experiences.
Awesome. And yeah, and just a quick time check, it is flying. It's blowing my mind. So I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to ask to try and see if we can't keep the answers a little quicker. And so I want to change the transition over to the state on this. And, from, as you know very well, aviation planning has traditionally been very siloed, from other modes. And so I'm wondering, is there anything that you're bringing from your prior experiences into your new roles, to dismantle some of those legacy silos that have prevented a more equitable transportation system? Maybe it's on the environmental or sustainability piece, are there threads there we can pull from?
Oh, absolutely. And both Gabby and I have had previous experience in other modes of transportation and their settings. So we bring that experience in, but also a big factor is that the Division of Aeronautics is maybe 25 people to include everybody. So we need to work with our colleagues in other offices in mass transportation and rail, transportation planning, and research and innovation across the board in CalTrans. So we certainly engage with our colleagues, and also events like this. This is a very important element of what we do. And I have to say, we've been very fortunate in the last few months, have many opportunities to engage in discussions and learning. And so the silos are breaking down out of necessity, but also out of desire. And that's a very important element to it, is that the participants in AAM want to create that collegiality. And I certainly invite everyone to seek out our knowledge if you should have a question, and as we will seek out yours. Gabby, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just emphasize that we are just working on partnerships within CalTrans, within the Office of Sustainability and the Office of Race and Equity. We're looking at creating a working group here, and yeah, emphasize our partnerships with external agencies, a variety of them as well.
And just to add a very quick note, is our documents reflect that. So the California Aviation System Plan mentions topics such as freight connectivity and active transportation. And of course, when we get into the revision of the handbook, we're just starting that process. It's probably a couple of years out, but we want to be certainly cognizant of multimodal connectivity and also the various ethical issues that come up with equity and so forth.
Awesome. Yeah, active transportation and aviation is something that I held close to my heart. When I was doing my work in Utah with a lot of the tourism locations in Utah. So, Barry, with all that context, with talking about bringing new ideas, new diversity of thought into the aviation industry, breaking down silos. How's that impacting the way that you're thinking about how you can provide services to help cities work through some of this stuff?
Well, I think a lot of it is just to think digitally. Like, so much we could simulate today can be done in a simulated environment, and the way that we're going to improve the interaction within environments that we're in. Somebody brought up the sustainability pieces, whether it's noise or energy, all those things can be digitally simulated. And I think the government's done a very, very good job, especially in the Defense Department, of being able to simulate many of these items before they're produced. So my recommendation, as much as you can, use those simulation tools that allow us as organizations to better simulate these environments before we actually put them in real world production.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think we have that capability now, greater than we ever have. And so I think it's exciting to see what we can do with that kind of simulation and stuff. So yeah, so with that, I'd like to transition from the panelist Q&A, and maybe we have time, Jorge, to look at the whiteboard and see what some of our audience participation has revealed. It's amazing to see this level of engagement on here. I really appreciate all our audience members taking time to look at this. And so, yeah, this is a lot to go through. Let's go up, Jorge. Let's go to the use cases one. Let's talk about that real quick. So, something I think as we get rural, I think traditionally they've had more of the focus on the small UAS and the UAS use cases, where air taxi has been had more of an urban focus. But I think emergency management has always been something that's that can have positive impacts, in both rural and urban settings, as well as the mid-mile package delivery. And so, yeah, I'm happy to see that was reflected in, the engagement here on the board. Wondering if any of our panelists have any thoughts on what they see here, any surprises, or, what do you think? I'll just throw it out there to anybody that's ready to answer.
I do think that the cargo environment is one in which is probably the most, the easiest to get to now. There's a lot that's being done in kind of some of the sites like in Alaska and in Maine to deliver kind of unmanned cargo to some of the islands out there. I just feel like there's a lot of opportunity right there that we can learn from.
One of the comments below mentioned safety. And when we talk about emergency management, it's routine maintenance using AAM equipment like a drone to do a bridge inspection or to go into a location that had a wildfire or a flood. These events are happening, but it takes less time, it's quicker, and it's much safer. So that the benefits are already present and will only increase. At CalTrans, we have over 200 individuals who've been certified to fly the drones, and I imagine that will continue to increase. And other states probably have similar numbers.
Yeah, I think a lot of particularly state DOTs are realizing that the cost savings and then also the time savings in associated with potentially having to close a lane down or bringing people out there to that's going to have other impacts on the traffic. So that's great. And and I'll just flag as we move to start wrapping this up, down there on the challenges and concerns that policymakers had, and even though the writing was real small, my eyes caught community engagement. My eyes caught equity, and a few other instances of community. And I think that's something that, given the relatively nascent environment that we're working within, we have an opportunity to gather input from communities, like we've never had before, with a mobility technology. And so, I want a foot stomp on that. The fact that we need to be getting out there to engage the community, to understand how the community is going to learn. That's going to happen at all phases, all the spheres that are working with us, on the industry side, on the government side, and then also the community is going to obviously it has to be heavily involved on this front. And so one thing I'll flag on that front, though, that I know a lot of communities are struggling with now is the resources. So community engagement, policy making, the stuff that we want to see happen to shape an equitable AAM future requires resources. And so I'll just put that nugget in everybody's ears. Think about how do we resource the necessary work that needs to come from this. And so with that, we have a few more minutes. And so I'd like to just go around the room one more time and, quick 30 seconds, what are your final thoughts? What do you want to leave our audience members with in this? And we'll start with the order of, our panelists are introduced. So Banaz, just a quick rundown.
Sure, I'll have 2 points. One is, and this kind of goes back to what you just showed with the challenges and opportunities. For implementation and deployment purposes, we need to talk, and we being industry need to talk to the planners, to the public agencies, to the non-aviation stakeholders, in addition to our industry peers. Because if we have to work through the challenges before we're ready to implement, and the planners are the ones who are in the field that can, help us implement and tell us what policies need to change. And we have the capacity to help engage the community members and show the visuals and create the assets to engage their comments. But my final closing remarks is going to be creativity is clear. It's key. We can only add so much pavement to this world. And if a transit route is not planned for a community, it doesn't mean that their only option is going to be driving to and from that location. We have the capability and opportunity to augment our transportation network to a third dimension. And this will, create opportunities to existing underserved communities and to use ground transportation routes for specific, hopefully shorter routes and complement with AAM routes. Thank you.
Right. Final takeaways from the state, Matt and Gabby.
Overall, briefly, as mentioned before, policy and ethics need to lead the way, and CalTrans is based on four fundamental principles of safety, environment, equity, and economic prosperity. As long as we keep all those items together, we're going to be fine. Gabby, anything else?
I would just say convening all the appropriate stakeholders is going to be of the most importance, especially here at the state, making sure we have all the right people in the room when decisions are being made. And there is public outreach and education is at the forefront for sure.
Awesome. What about from a region, Priscilla?
Well, advanced air mobility has the potential to create greater mobility choices, and it can encourage more sustainable ways to get around, lowering emissions, vehicle miles traveled. It has the potential to increase capacity on our roadways, make urban and rural connections to communities that have been historically pushed out because of unaffordable living conditions. But AAM cannot be the solution alone. It has to be integrated into our transportation system and other modes of choice. And in order for us to reach our state and federal mandated objectives, we need to have this being integrated, and we need to have collaboration between all levels of government and between industry and stakeholders like education institutions and more. And so, yeah.
Awesome. Bring us home, Barry.
Yeah, Priscilla and Gabby, I think said it perfectly. I think there's a collaboration between all parties that are needed. And I think I just, for our perspective, see the ability to be able to show and simulate and get the community engaged in technology that will be able to better simulate these worlds today. So you can make better decisions today when the reality comes a couple of years from now.
Awesome. I can't believe how quickly time flew, so I want to say a quick thanks to all our fantastic panelists and everyone for joining us. This event is the second of 3 virtual workshops, and we will conclude with an in-person workshop early next year. So please follow Urban Movement Labs to receive updates. And finally, I just want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the person who brought this all together, Jorge Cañas. Today is his last day with Urban Movement Labs, and we are sad to see him go. But I am very grateful to be able to call him a friend and to learn from him, over the past year and a half. So best of luck, Jorge. And we look forward to seeing the great work that you're going to be doing in the future. And so with that, I will conclude this session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all.